Me lords, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, peasants and fellow riffraff, here we are once again with Mickey Panel, and we're looking at a Shay Atkins tune today, Dark Eyes. Going to be very difficult to learn, very difficult to play. This is an advanced level guitar piece. The good news is if you don't actually learn everything in the tune, that's not a problem. There's so many different interesting techniques that can be applied to any tunes of this type. Loads of Shay's best stuff was on this version. So what I'm going to do today, first I'll show you the chords, then I'll show you the Dark Eyes melody in fingerstyle, and then in detail we'll have a look at some of the techniques. So, first thing to know, Shay Atkins' version of Dark Eyes is in E minor, which is different from the Gypsy Jazz, which is D minor. Also, the chords of Shay's version are slightly simplified. I'll show you the two chord sequences first so that we know what we're superimposing the melody on top of. First chord. That's a B7 down to E minor. Say it again. E minor. That's the really most simple version you can get of that. It's not actually correct in the sense of the original Ukrainian song. If you're playing this with a Gypsy Jazz group, there's a couple of extra chords you can put in. Shay doesn't do them mainly because he's having to deal with melody on top of these things, but in many of the figures they're actually implied. So I'll show you more the Gypsy Jazz chord approach, which has got two different chords in. The first, again, it starts on the 5th. Back to the B7th. And here we're going to go to the C. Up to E minor, or the Gypsy Jazz guys play an E minor 6th usually there, so you can play that one. Obviously they're playing in a different key, but you can play it up there as well. This chord looks like a half diminished. Back to the E, and then another difference to finish it off. In the Gypsy Jazz and the more traditional versions, many times they go to the F. And the reason they do that is because it's a kind of jazz style thing. You can end up soloing over that sequence. So now on Shay's version, he does actually use the A minor 6th, but he uses it out of this position, and I'll explain exactly why. Let's just go through those notes. Nice chord. Now, the melody. First of all, I'm going to show you the part which is in 4/4 time. Shay, don't know how he does it, plays 3/4 time with the exact same melody, and then moves into 4/4 time and starts to play more the kind of classic approach. I'll show you first how to play the 4/4 version. So I'll play it fast first. mistakes and all. So what we're doing is we're going to begin on the 3rd fret of the B string, so that's a B flat. And then we're going up to the B string. So really it's just these 3 notes. But obviously you're fingering the chord at the same time, so it's better if you do it down around the B 7th chord here. So again, you can do the alternate picking here. Because it begins in B, you'll be starting on the A string, going up to the D string, down to the bottom. There's a bit of, any Johnny Cash fans will recognise that type of thing. Or the other version, if that is a bit too complicated for you, which it is for me when I'm playing these things and I haven't really practiced much, I do more the Merle Travis type of picking, where you hit the bottom 2 notes together, very heavily damped with the palm, and then the D and the G string together. And the beauty of the Merle Travis type of thing is it doesn't really matter whether it's a chord which is based on with the root note on the G string, or if it's one of the ones which is on the A string, because he used to mute so heavily that it was much more of a percussive thing and you barely got the actual bass sound coming through. So that's always a nice device to use if you're out of practice or you get lost or whatever. So let's just go through that again. So they're actually these notes here. You've got the C on the 2nd string and then off. So that's that. Then we're going to go into a kind of B 9th chord. And here you've got so B string open, top E string open, and down to the E flat. So when it goes down to the E flat, you're actually fingering the 3 notes of the B 7th chord. So it's a bit of a complicated one. My advice, go to the transcription. I've put it onto mickeypanel.com. That's MIKIPANNELL, and I've actually put the full Shay Atkins transcription. It's not my version, but you can look at them together and see how you can use different ideas from the 2 together. And my advice would be to try and actually learn this one from the tab or from the music if you're capable. Otherwise you're going to have problems with it. But anyway, pressing forward. Okay, what comes after that? Okay, the whole thing now moves up to the 7th position. I knew this was going to be an absolute nightmare to teach this song. And here we're still basically on the same 2 chords. We're playing mainly out of the E minor position and the B 7th position. There's one little figure here which appears. The notes here, if you wanted to just play the melody on its own, would be the G on the 2nd string, Then you've got the F sharp on the second string and the E on the third string. And then the part where it gets even more complicated, we're off now to the A minor section. And then it's going to be moving back down to the E again. So those are the basic positions that we're in. First position was around here. The second position was up on the 7th one, at first with the B7th, and then going to the E minor. Then there's the other melody, which I'm just about to show you, which is actually over an A minor chord, just, you know, your bog standard A minor, before it finally moves back to this position. You have to be really patient with this one. It took me ages to kind of figure it out and get it going, but once you get it and you practice it, it's such a beautiful piece. The final part was as you can see, I haven't got a clue how to play it so slowly. You'll have to go through it with the transcription. I'll play the whole thing through up to tempo, and then if you still haven't kind of quite got it, what you can do, install Google Looper, which gives you the possibility of slowing things down to 75% or half speed, and go through it like that. So again. So that's the first section. It's a battle, I can tell you that, but stick at it. Go through it with transcription, try and figure out where the little melody notes, and practice it. As you can see, I'm completely out of practice, but I can't be bothered to do the practicing just for a tutorial. So that's the first part. Now then, the next part is based on a figure which is almost like a flamenco riff. Which is the B going up to C, both of these on the third string. And then finger picking the top three strings of the B chord. So it's just basically three notes there. And you can put these kind of flamenco style flourishes where you've got like a single or like a double arpeggio. Usually with flamenco, it's the ring finger that drags the last one down. Okay. The third figure is nice and actually quite simple riff, this one. So to begin with, you got these two notes, basically the top of the E minor chord, move down one, back up. So that's these two notes, A and C. The same position, just moved down 3 frets. Back to the original. And this time we're going to the top of the A major chord, which is E on the second string, G on the top string. Then up again to the top of the D. Going out and tune a bit there. So I'll play that quickly again. And then Cheyenne ends it with a riff which I've also forgotten, but it's something along the lines of. So that's E at the top, and then there's a hammer on and a pull off from the 10th to the 12th. And once you get that up to speed, that's a nice little effect. And then he does a flamenco style run, which begins, it's all based out of the E minor chord, but it begins on the 7th fret. And the important thing here for any version of Dark Eyes is that you actually shift the whole position down. So this whole this type of tonality that you get in a lot of Russian music is actually based on a Hungarian minor scale, which you might want to go through and figure out. The scale is it's very similar to like an E harmonic minor, but you've got so the difference is that there's just the 4th is raised. So instead of doing the, we're doing. And what that gives you is these 3 notes, which you can. And you can figure that out anywhere on the neck. That's. And also the nice thing about that is that there's this big jump here. There's this big interval which gives that a very kind of Eastern European sound. So if you like to improvise in jazz and flamenco, and you want to give a very kind of exotic sound, that's a nice device to use. And Shay uses it in this way, where he plays the note, goes down, up again, and then plays a scale down. How many notes, I can't remember exactly what he does, but I'll play that scale again. So it's. But the important thing here is to make sure that you're using the first finger to just drop the position down and go back up, so that you retain this position. A million ideas you can get out of that. You can put that into any flamenco tune, any minor, over any minor scale. So what was the next part? And then there's this beautiful part which goes again, we're doing the same thing. We're beginning on the B, but we're sliding down with the first finger and then going back up, and it's all based on this fingering pattern. Dun, 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 dun. So the first chord, if you can see that, you've got a C on the top, an A on the second string, and a G flat here. Dun, 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 dun. Now the important thing here is you've got to get your foot tap into this, because it's 3 notes, but it's not triplets, so you have to. This took a bit of practice, but there's loads and loads and loads of shade tunes where it uses this device where you basically 2 bars, I think, are divided into a group of 3 and another group of 3 and a group of 2 notes together, which technically somebody explained to me once is actually a rumba. It's also what you find in banjo rolls and banjo techniques, but what it's definitely not, it's not triplets, it's not da 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 da, it's not like that. It's so you get your foot going. And the one part of the chord which is moving is the top string, going from the C to the B. What comes after that? And then we've got the top of a C chord here for the second part of it. But because you've got the top doing this figure where it moves up and down, you can't finger it with the first finger, because you're going to be moving 2 notes. So you have to do this very kind of awkward C, where you've got the top 3 notes of this C chord, but fingered in such a way, how was it? And then it moves down to exactly the same figure on the top of a standard B. And this time you're dropping 2 notes to the A. Now this part is interesting because we are doing the top of an E minor chord here. If you imagine this E minor chord where you've got fingered like this, and this time instead of the top one going down and up, we're adding the note with a pinky on top. So I'll play that whole thing again first up to speed. Then it does the same figure up here. Oh, what comes after that? That's basically back to the beginning. So I think you got enough information there. And then to finish off that whole phrase, so I finished it in a way that went which was just the top of this is like a B chord going through the minor inversions, bit of kind of bluesy thing, but finger picking the notes, I think, in a combination of about 4. So that's like a, it's a technique like that, so thumb 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, but with a muting technique on this hand, which kills one of the notes. Don't ask me which one because it's just too fast. But if you practice kind of taking these fingers on and off, the thing Shay Atkins actually does on the original is he plays out of these chord shapes. So he does a 3-finger roll where it goes, and then what was the other part? So I think the Shay one goes something like this. So the way to do that, you slide up to the E minor on the A string and you play a little triad. This is all out of an imaginary B chord here. So this is the E flat, different inversion of the B chord with, and then the top inversion down to A, and then through these, I'm not sure if it's a diminished chord or the top of the 7th chord, but so again. I haven't played that phrase for about 5 years, so but again, this is another typical Shay cliche. Again, Shay Atkins was always an improviser, so he would take a position like this out of the B, and he would almost randomly pick groups of notes from that chord. In this case, he's doing an upward arpeggio. On many other tracks he does like downward arpeggio, or sometimes he actually begins in the middle and then does other combinations, but it's usually based around 4 notes, or it's in 4/4 time using groups of 3. We'll see this again in just a second. Okay, so on to the final part. Now the final part is another of these techniques which is based on the 3-note pattern, but it's the 3-note pattern imposed over a 4/4 rhythm. And the basic pattern, you've got to get your foot going on this, is not triplets like I mentioned before. This time we're going to be doing it over chords. So if we take the B 7th chord, now this is another thing that is probably a good idea to actually look at the transcription for this to get the timing right. So you've got to get your foot going, and then it's groups of 3. Da, 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 da. So there's a group of 3 notes out of the chord, and then there's the same chord but just with a different inversion, a little bit higher. Again, Shay probably played it different every time he ever did it, but on this one, to start on the B, you could do, or you could do, I don't know. And you get a group of 3, and then you get another group of 3, and then there's 2 notes to finish it, and that, if you look at it on the transcription, actually makes 2 bars of music, which should be 8 notes. Very, very important if you want to play the styles of Jerry Reed, these old banjo-influenced pickers. They all did this, and the same technique can be applied to rumba and various other styles. So it's a really, really important figure to learn. Sometimes he hits the final note. I'm not sure if he does it on Dark Eyes, but there's various other recordings of that. Sometimes he just continues to play the whole figure. Okay, now the interesting harmonic thing that's happening here is there's a group of chords being played, but if you pay attention to the top E string, you'll notice that at the top of each chord there's this ascending scale going up. Now, I did actually learn this whole part correctly, the same way that Shay did it. I'll try and show you that, but some of the fingerings are so incredibly unusual and difficult. I prefer to do a simplified version. So the first chord is just a standard B7th chord, and then we're going to an E minor with the G on top, and again you can finish it off with 2 notes or just 1 note and a stroke. Then I like to finger the next chord as just a B7th like this, where you've got the typical kind of bar chord with the 7th on top. That's the 3rd chord. And then there's a chord up here. Okay, this is the figure that you need to use for this one. I've completely forgotten how to play this one. The Shay version has got his thumb right the way over, holding not the bottom string, but actually holding the octave of the E at the 7th fret here. Now, why exactly he did that, I'm not really sure, because you can perfectly do it with the open E at the bottom and get the same chord. It's a quite dissonant sounding chord. I'll go through the notes of it for you. So if you put your first finger on the 9th fret of the 4th string, the D string, then you've got the 6th fret of the 3rd string, the 8th of the 2nd string, and the 7th of the top. So be careful with the fingering. So you got the bottom note is actually with the 4th one, and then the next one's with the 1st, like that. So, and if you put the chord over the top, that's a toughie, I tell you. Once you get it going in the chord sequence, it's quite easy. I find it really difficult to finger this stuff slowly. Once you memorised it and got your finger memory going at one speed, to actually change the speed just messes everything up. And then we're going to a really interesting chord which looks like this and sounds beautiful. Now it's actually quite a simple chord really, because what you've got is just the E minor with the 6th on the top, but fingered in such a way that we've got the E at the bottom on the 2nd string, and then the 3rd finger here is fretting the 2 middle strings at the 9th fret. On top of that, with the 2nd finger on the 2nd string, we've got the G note, so that's just an E minor chord, and then there's a 6th on the top. And obviously you've got again the same pattern of the 1, 2, 3, so it's a thumb, 1st finger, 2nd finger, thumb, 1st finger, 2nd finger, and then 2 notes to finish, which probably are the thumb and the first finger. So again, then the next chord is a B seventh, like this, but you've got this kind of high inversion where the two bottom notes are these ones, and on top you've got that little chord that probably everybody knows, which is and then we're back to and then the final figure that Shay does is the top three strings, and I think he plays quite a simple arpeggio, which is top of a minor, then that's the top of the D chord, top of the C chord and top of the B chord. And then, as we saw earlier, the final three chords could either be the top of the A or this kind of little diminished figure, which is I think it's actually out of a diminished chord. I've heard this on a lot of old flamenco and classical records, and there's many different variations that you can do. You can use different combinations. So I think that covers just about everything. Stay tuned here, help spread the word, and happy picking, y'all.